Starting out on mute tonight. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Together We Build Inpatient Units virtual town hall. This is the 7th in our series of conversations looking at different program-specific areas of planning for the new Windsor-Essex Acute Care Hospital. Before we begin tonight, let's respectfully acknowledge that the Windsor Regional Hospital occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Niswi, Ishkoden, Anishinaabe, the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. We acknowledge the land and the surrounding waters for sustaining us, and we are committed to protecting and restoring these lands and waters from environmental degradation. On behalf of the project management team overseeing Stage 2 planning for the new hospital, we are pleased to welcome everyone joining us tonight via Zoom webinar. I'm Allison Johnson, Manager of Communications and Community Engagement for the project, and your moderator for this evening. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to meet some members of the user groups designing the inpatient units at the new hospital, and this includes medical, surgical, and critical care units. You'll have the opportunity to learn a bit about the work that they're doing and to ask questions. So to ask questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible tonight. And at the end of tonight's presentation, if you still have further questions, we invite you to visit our engagement platform and ask them there. Please note the focus of this town hall is Stage 2 planning of inpatient units. So this includes items related to the physical structure of the units in the rooms, their layout, what other programs and services need to be located nearby, design features, and technologies. To maintain the flow of this conversation, we ask that you please ensure your questions are related to this topic. And following tonight's conversation, again, we invite you to visit our engagement platform, and that's at togetherwebuild.wrh.on.ca. There, ask any further questions, take our surveys, and share your ideas. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our panel guests for this evening. Everyone, please welcome Teresa Morris. She is Vice President of Medicine and Corporate Patient Flow. Dr. Ian Mazzetti, Chief of Medicine. Christy Cecile, Director of Medicine Services. Kelly Heron, Director of Surgical Inpatient Services. Lucy Brune is a partner at Agnew Peckham Healthcare Planning and Consultants, and she's been working closely with the inpatient user groups. Nate Boucher and Thomas Vita are our patient representatives working with the inpatient user groups. Dr. Andrew Petrakis, Director of Clinical Services Planning, and Paul Landry, Project Director for the new Windsor-Essex Acute Care Hospital project. Thanks everyone for being with us tonight. Dr. Petrakis, I want to ask you, I'm excited for this conversation because when you go to new hospitals and you see what they look like, the inpatient units from a user perspective are the one thing that stands out in terms of how different a new hospital really will be. How do inpatient units fit into the bigger planning picture?
Thanks, Allison, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to welcome all the community participants on behalf of really approximately 40 functional planning groups this evening. We look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions as we plan for the new inpatient adult units of our new hospital. It's really very important when we decide and explore the possibilities of where our inpatient unit should be located in relationship to other departments within the hospital. First and foremost, we look at the relationship of the inpatient units. Believe it or not, is the parking convenient for the patients and their families when they come to the hospital to visit families? Is there going to be a welcoming entrance to the hospital with intuitive wayfinding to family elevators that take patients and families to their respective inpatient units and their families? We also have to consider critical relationships between inpatient units, the med-surg units, and areas such as diagnostic imaging, critical care, the operating rooms. So all these things have to be taken into consideration when planning occurs. As well, these inpatient units have to have accessibility to the hospital main street, and I'm sure Lucy or Paul will describe more in terms of what the main street means. It'll be the place where there's retail, food services, and pharmacies available for patients and families when they leave or come into the hospital. For now, I think we'll let Lucy continue on when she gets her questions in just a few seconds, and she'll expand on a few of these concepts. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you. Let's go now to Teresa. Teresa, can you talk about what the vision of the user groups are when it comes to creating the ultimate patient room for patients in the new hospital?
Thanks, Allison, and welcome everyone. Yes, it's very exciting really to be sitting here and talking about the new inpatient rooms and all of you here to talk about building these rooms. But really, I think the vision for us is that we want them to be patient and family friendly and visitor friendly also, that we want them to meet all the needs of our patients and our family. We want them to be safe and efficient. We want to make sure that all the IPAC rules and principles are going to be able to be followed. We've learned a lot in the past couple of years with COVID, and we want to make sure that they are safe for our patients. We also want them to be adaptable and very efficient. We want to be able to make changes if we need to on the fly. So those are really some of the high principles that we want to make sure that we meet with our inpatient rooms.
And Christy, maybe I can get you to expand a bit on this. How do the current patient rooms stack up against the rooms that Teresa was just describing, and how will that benefit the patients?
Thanks, Allison, and hello, everyone. So our current patient rooms are actually very small, especially at the OLET site. There is a lot of issues when it comes to isolation precautions in those rooms. We do have concerns with families visiting those rooms in the close proximity to other patients. Confidentiality is also a very big issue because of how the close proximity of patients to family members and to physicians that are coming in who want to deliver specific news or messages, care plans. The nurses are trying to do, their independent double checks, which actually give confidentiality could be breached because we're describing patients' names, first and last names. We're following the process that Windsor Regional has laid out to ensure patient safety. But again, we are cognizant of this close proximity that we are with other patients. So the new hospital, having the space in the rooms, the ability to get our patients up and mobilizing within the rooms, if there's an isolation precaution, it's a lot easier to have the mobility happening within the room when able. It's more feasible to get them up to the bathroom, to get families into the room, being able to work with our patients with us. So we're really looking forward to the new hospital build, the room capacity to have the families, visitors, the physicians, nursing team, all at the bedside to be able to give care plans and give news in the real time and not being afraid of confidentiality breaches or IPAC concerns. So really great stuff, and really looking forward to everyone's input on this and our next stage. Thanks, Allison.
And I just want to stay with you for a second, because one of the things that we talked about was the bigger rooms, more private rooms, but you haven't hit on bathrooms. What will that mean for patients to have their own washroom compared to the situation now?
Yeah, so currently we do have unfortunately, some patient rooms that do not have their own bathroom. Patients actually have to leave their own patient rooms, cross a hallway and use a public bathroom. So having our own patient dedicated bathrooms also helps us with our infection control. Right now we use dedicated toileting, which sometimes is a commode, which is at a bedside, which again is not the best for privacy and confidentiality for patients and patients' comfort within a room, as well as co-ed rooms right now. So with COVID, we've had to sometimes mix genders in rooms for isolation precautions as our #1 priority. And with the new build, we'll be able to have more private rooms, so we won't have those types of concerns. We'll have our own bathrooms. So again, yes, that is a big issue right now, especially at the OLET site. So it's definitely something we're looking forward to. Yeah, it's going to be very exciting. It's definitely something that the patients are going to be very excited to have and not be contested with the bathrooms and the genders and isolation precautions. So we are excited.
And wait till you see the size of these washrooms. I don't know if we have any photos in the presentation today, but I know when you go into the washrooms here, they're very small. I don't know how some people can fit into them, you know, let alone sometimes a wheelchair or an assistant. And the new washrooms look much different than that. Kelly, a question for you now, because we did just talk about how this will impact the patients, but what about the staff? What impact will these large private rooms have on those who are providing the care within?
Thanks, Allison, and thanks for having me here. It's a really exciting time for all of us. Just to piggyback on what Christy was saying about some of the benefits to the patients, also the staff being able to provide that care. I think the larger rooms, you can tell Christy and I are both nurses because we get very excited when we talk about bathrooms and space and being able to provide that personal care to patients. Not only that, it will allow us to have that equipment closer to the place where it needs to be for the patients to conduct that care. A lot less movement for the staff, a lot less searching and finding, which equals a lot more time at the bedside, where you can spend time with the patient, providing care. In addition, a lot less patient traveling. I think now we are challenged, like Christy had said, with different IPAC needs, with having to isolate patients. We have to do a lot of room moves, and that really does disturb the level of care we can provide to the patients and their family. You have to learn a whole new care team, new nursing staff. Sometimes we have to switch units, ends of departments. And honestly, with private rooms and more private rooms, and ability to care for you during your stay within that one location just will equal a higher quality of care for everyone. So we're really excited about all these advancements that are to come for our patients and our staff.
Allison, maybe I can add that these rooms will all be accessible for patients. They'll be family friendly. There'll be 3-piece bathrooms within each room. And as well, there'll be special rooms for the bariatric patients, special considerations being given to them as well.
Great. And I do want to just mention for those who are joining us tonight who may not be familiar with the term IPAC, that is a term that we've used a lot over the past 2 years. And I know everyone here is very familiar with it. But when we refer to IPAC, it's infection prevention and control. So all of the, you know, not sharing a washroom and having the all of the new features that Lucy will describe and everyone will talk about through this, it is going to make infection prevention and control a lot less challenging in the new hospitals. A question now for Dr. Mazzetti. What are some of the important considerations that the team has top of mind when working on this? And particularly, I know that you're representing tonight the critical care user group.
Thanks, Allison, for your question. And thanks everyone for turning up tonight. I know it's some time after hours, so we really appreciate your input. So I think, you know, as a clinician, top of mind for us is it's patient experience. I mean, just to piggyback on what's been said, you know, the concept of being able to talk about the plan of care with my patient and their family in a private space. And not only that, but what our patients have to say to their loved ones and their family. You know, maybe children are visiting, maybe a spouse is visiting. You know, some of those conversations, particularly in critical care, are difficult. And, you know, you want to have a private space to be able to have those in. I think from a clinical care perspective, and Lucy will tell us, I think, a bit about this in her presentation, but the concept of having different pods. So an ICU can have, say, for example, 36 beds, but, you know, organized according to different pods of 12 beds. You can have a different intensivist looking after each pod. It's a really elegant setup as opposed to, a big circle of ICU where you're running from place to place, having to get across the unit quickly, potentially. I think from an infection control perspective, I mean, we've learned lessons related to the pandemic. And so there's going to be the appropriate, number of isolation rooms and things like that. And then, of course, thinking about teaching, those teaching experiences, we teach our learners, patients teach us. I mean, our students are taught by patients and their families, sort of the illness experience. And so I think those encounters will be all the richer in the new facility.
And on that note, I do want to mention that tomorrow we are going to be talking about the future hospital as it relates to education, both staff and our students and learners. So another opportunity there for everyone who's joining us if you want to hear more about that as well. Thanks, Dr. Mazzetti. Throughout the planning of this stage 2, the user groups are working closely with Agnew Peckham Healthcare Planning. And this team has been involved in many of the largest and most recent hospital builds in Ontario and right across Canada, including the new Humber River and the new Oakville Trafalgar. And Lucy Brune has been working closely with these user groups, and she's going to talk now about the work that they've been doing and some trends her team is seeing as it relates to inpatient units in new hospitals. Lucy?
Thanks, Allison. And it is an honor to be here tonight, but also to be working with the Windsor hospitals and community. I first started working with the hospitals in the 1980s. And at that point, the Met was very new, relatively speaking. And it's hard to believe when Paul, it kind of hit me tonight that, when the new hospital opens in 2030, the units at the Met will be 60, am I doing my math right? No, 30, over 60 years old. And some of the ones at Willette will be even older than that. So it is quite shocking that the planning, so it's important that planning proceed as soon as possible. And and this is going to be fantastic. All of our clients who have been able to build new hospitals are absolutely thrilled. So it's not that far off for Windsor and Essex. So I'm going to just share my screen and presentation that I have. And so what we're talking about tonight is the adult inpatient units and both med-surg and critical care. And so what the stage 1 functional program is comprised of the inpatient services at the new hospital. We look at flows, both workload, the workload and the staffing, the adjacencies, what are the other key departments that have to be either directly accessible or convenient. And we look at 2 types of corridors. One is the public corridors and another, which we call front of house. And we also have the back of house corridors, which are the support corridors, which are only used by patient staff and materials flow. The product, the last page and the most important pages, I should say, in some departments, there's at least 3 or 4 pages of rooms listed, but we provide a detailed space list, every room, how many, how big, and we organize them in terms of the zones or the pods in which they have to be located in order to achieve operational efficiency. In the functional program, we're looking at not just the day of opening, but also, so we're looking at 20, 28, 29 projections, and also 20, 38, 39 projections, because we want to make sure that we're not just building this hospital for the day that it's opening. It has to have the flexibility built in for additional beds and capacity. And some of that would be done, it'll be done in terms of details of looking at what the strategies are, whether it's soft space or, already built and then shelled in as part of the stage 3 planning. But part of the layouts absolutely start in 2B. And once we finish our space lists, and we've got a bit of a schematic on the right-hand side that shows, what do we mean by block schematics. Fundamentally, we need to make sure that the configuration or the dimensions of the department are such that you can actually lay out the rooms in an efficient way. So a functional program is the foundation for all of the planning that comes after. So it has a number of sections. The functions section lists the services that are provided. Then we touch on all the key staff, patient and materials flow. And this helps to communicate to the architects exactly what the patient flow and the family flows are, so that we can make sure that the required adjacencies are achieved. Of course, the projected beds is the major space driver. And And then also the staffing is important because we need to know how many workstations for documentation, how big does the lounge need to be, how many lockers are required. The planning and design requirements section lists all the key departmental adjacencies. It talks about the organization of the beds in terms of zones and pods, and of course the numbers of rooms that are required. So I'll stop just there for a second, and I've got a bit of a schematic later. But when we talk about pods, we typically talk about in a 36-bed unit, 3 pods of 12 beds. And similarly, in critical care units, we talk about 12-bed pods, 2 of those pods adjacent to each other to create a 24-bed critical care unit. And why do we like the number 12 and the number 36? It's because they're divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. And so from a staffing perspective, those are the best groupings. Also, we've done all sorts of research as well in terms of all the support areas. And what we mean by that is things like clean supplies, soil utility, medication room, and offices and workstations and equipment storage, etc. It's the most optimal from a capital planning as well. And then the space allocation list, every room, how many, how big, and we list them in a way that communicates what needs to be near each other. So I think that it's also important to really look at what are some of the key components of contemporary inpatient unit design. And I've touched on the organization of the units a little as well. The size of the patient rooms has increased significantly, even over the last 20 years. I think that in the 90s, we were still probably using standards that, were not as big as they probably should have been, because at that point, there wasn't the same recognition about the need for accessibility. And by that, we mean, making the rooms large enough that people who are in wheelchairs or in scooters can actually get around the bed into the washroom. And so the CSA has done a tremendous amount of work in terms of establishing national standards or guidelines. It actually started in Ontario in 2008. And it was the key reason for doing it was that planning for the new Humber and Oakville hospitals were underway, as well as others. And the Ministry of Health wanted to make sure that we were using, that we had really studied it and made sure that we were using more contemporary standards than had been used in the past. So just as an example of what do we mean by the size of the patient rooms? Currently at the Willette, or at the Met, if you were in a 4-bedroom, on average, you'd have 110 square feet. If you were in a semi-private room, you'd have about 115 square feet. Now I'm including the washrooms when I've done this calculation. A new 1-bedroom, including the washrooms, is 290 square feet. That's the difference in terms of when we talk about, making it a nicer experience for the patients and their families. And I'll show you some images that show what kind of furniture, therefore, can you get in those types of rooms. For infection prevention and control, there's 2 types of rooms that we talk about. One, there's a patient room. It is actually set up for contact isolation because it's a private room and it's enclosed. Then there's airborne isolation. And airborne isolation, what we're trying to do is if you've got an infectious patient in a room, you don't want any of that air going out into the corridor. And so there's an anteroom that helps with the pressurization and prevention of that air getting into the hallway and potentially infecting other people. So currently at the Met, there are no airborne isolation rooms on the units. There's 1-bedrooms, only 11% of them, as compared to 100% in the future. And current standard we use is on the med-surg units, about 8 or 9% of the rooms would be fully airborne isolation with that anteroom and the negative pressure. And in the critical care units, 25% of them would be airborne isolation. So the other thing that we do to support infection prevention is that there are more accessible, or there's more of them, and more accessible soil utility rooms, clean supply rooms, and medication rooms. And that also leads to operational efficiency and flexibility because the nurses don't have to walk as far for supplies, for medications, and for putting soiled items into the soil utility room. And the most important part is, of course, patient and family-centered care. And the way that we help to support that is by, first of all, making the rooms large enough and having equipment in there for the families, including the families being able to stay overnight. We have a family lounge, including a kitchenette or a nourishment area, so you can get tea or coffee or store, some food in a fridge. And there's a quiet family room. So if a conversation needs to occur outside of the patient room, it can be done in private in that quiet family room. Or families may just want to use that for just to get away and to have some quiet time. And we are also, part of the user group talked about last time, one of the things we talked about was having actually a room for families where they could go and take a shower and just have a rest and a sleep if they needed to. So those are, and of course, there's also public washrooms for families to use so that they don't have to use the patient's washroom, or they don't have to go down into the retail space or elsewhere to be able to use a washroom. So I talked about the 1-bedroom as a standard room. We are standardizing acute inpatient units. It's basically all the same with some variation. At the next meeting, we're going to be talking about how many bariatric rooms are required. So because you do bariatric surgery, so these are actually even larger rooms. They're closer to, I think, 400 square feet as opposed to the 290. And then and there may be some more storage space required on some units. We are also going to have satellite rehabilitation areas to help patients get up and walk and learn how to do stairs again. And so there might be one that's a little larger than the standard one, for example, for stroke patients. And I talked about the sneaker time for nurses by trying to reduce it by bringing the clean supply soil utility and closer to the patients in those 12-bed pods. And then, of course, more and larger medication rooms as well. Throughout this, there will be technology that will allow documentation to occur in the room, outside of the room, again, trying to bring the nurse as close to the patient for as long as possible during the shift. And of course, there also needs to be great staff facilities. So on each of the 36-bed units or the 24-bed critical care units, we'll have lounges, lockers, privacy rooms. So if staff need to get away for a little break or to make a private phone call, they can do that. So what this schematic shows is that just, in an illustrative way, so we have a 36-bed unit, 3 pods of 12, adjacent to another 36-bed unit. And in fact, I've changed in the draft report, I've changed this and I've brought these beds close together because part of flexibility is making sure that the units can expand. So you might have a orthopedic program that actually needs 48 beds. Well, they can do that by just shifting into the adjacent 12-bed pod. It also provides support, these nurses supporting these nurses, which would be really hard if you have, a big elevator core in the middle, which is what has been done in some units, but other hospitals have brought these so that they are actually linked together. Each of the units would have their own shared administrative and support areas, but there'll be some sharing of spaces, for example, those rehab therapy areas that I talked about. This is an example of what we mean, in terms of a schematic of a unit. And in fact, these beds, instead of on one side, would be oriented the other way so that it could link into that other adjacent unit. So every unit or every pod has a team station. So usually the sickest patients would be located here, again, because it's closer to the station. Clean supplies, solar utility, et cetera, in these support areas. And then the main support and the things that would be required for all 36 beds would be in the center. These photos have been provided by Halton Healthcare, and that first one I showed as well was from Halton Healthcare. They have recently redeveloped the Oakville-Trafalgar Memorial Hospital and expanded the Milton District Hospital. So what we see here on the right-hand side is a critical care bed. And these rooms are 335 square feet. And I would think that it probably compares to about 180 square feet, maybe, in your current units. So each of these rooms has a two-piece washroom, which was a big fight with the ministry over the last number of years, but we finally got them to approve about 50% of the rooms at Oakville's critical care unit has washrooms. Yours will have 100%. You'll see that things are off the floor on these booms, and on this side is what we call the care area, and over on this side is the family area. So you'll see this a couch, and it's actually a pull-out couch. And so families can remain here overnight if they wanted to. Similarly, over on, this is an example of a med-surg inpatient room. Same thing over here is the family area. You'll see how big the windows are to bring in sunlight, or daylight, which has been shown to have a big impact on patient recovery. I'm not an interior designer, but I could talk about how soft this is with the wood floors and the lovely colors and the views outside. But for the patient, and the patient washroom is right here, very few steps to get to it. Humber River Hospital chose to put their washrooms, what we call outboard, and against this wall, and that just opened up the room even more. But that's definitely a stage 3 level of detail where you have to choose whether it's on board, closest to the hallway or furthest from the hallway. So obviously I've gone way past my time. I can talk about this for all night, but I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions after.
Thanks, Lucy, and I appreciate that. It is so exciting to hear this. I think that you covered a lot that's different and a lot that's exciting there to see from a staff perspective, from a patient perspective, and from a visitor perspective. And I think that some of those rooms that I saw there definitely were bigger than the basement apartment that I had when I was in university, and I had to share a washroom in that. So they are something to look forward to for sure. And I do want to remind everyone, if you have questions for Lucy or any of our panel guests tonight, please type them in the Q&A section. We're going to get to that very shortly. But right now, I want to bring in our patient and community representatives into the conversation. Very fortunate to have their perspectives with us throughout this planning stage. And Nate, I want to start with you. As a patient rep and someone who has spent, more time in the hospital than many of us have, what considerations are most important for you when you're at this table and why?
Right, of course, it's my privilege to be here. Thank you so much. A lot of the stuff that Lucy was saying really resonated with me. I love the attention to beauty. I think when we're in a rough place, we can't underestimate the value of beauty of art. And so the wide open windows, the colors of the rooms, they go a long way. Something that stands out to me personally, and this comes from my experience as an inpatient, both at Windsor Regional Hospital and also at London Health Sciences Center for a transplant in the transplant unit. I found a real juxtaposition between the area that is dedicated to movement for patients, as well as for the professionals, of course. And I felt that room for movement, whether it be just walking or fresh air, or at least being able to see outside, went a long way for me emotionally and maybe even physically in my healing. So I feel as though allocating space for movement for the sake of walking for the patients to recover is an excellent idea to keep in mind. Of course, I've heard a lot of really good things from everybody watching the YouTube videos from some of the panelists like Dr. Mazzetti. He talked about sunlight, he talked about efficiency for the multidisciplinary team to be able to get to and from very quickly. All these things are super important, of course, but I'd like to really focus in from my perspective as a youthful person in center would be the ability to move. And of course, last but not least, family and loved ones, to have space for them to spend time in the room and to go somewhere to escape that for a little bit too is important. And I think that's about all I'll say.
Well, I appreciate your perspective there and of course, your support of the user groups. Tom, a question for you. You've spent a lot of time in the hospital as well with relatives. What are you hoping to contribute in these user groups?
I've had the privilege and welcome to everyone who's shown the interest to be here. It's important to us and it's very important to me. Over about a 10-year period, I had 5 very close and dear family members go through the hospital system. Of those, none of them made it out, but a couple of them, if it's possible to say, were positive experiences. And I'll just link in on the one with my mom in CCU at the time at the Med campus. What was, besides the nature of what we were looking at and what was happening to her, it came clear to me that there's 2 different sides to this hospital question care. The patient side, but the staff side as well. And I couldn't have seen better care. One of the nurses there knew my mom liked her appearance. She wasn't vain by any stretch, but she knew that if she just came and brushed my mom's hair, that would mean the world to her. And I saw that happening in an area that, as was brought up earlier, it's ancient, has been patched together. The engineers and all those people looking after the facility have done a great job of keeping it going. But my God, do we deserve, we as patients and caregivers and the staff deserve proper facilities where when my mom was on her last breath, curtains were pulled around. The staff made it as private as possible, but people Windsor and the Essex County area, it's time we move forward. And I hope my input, I've had the privilege of being a patient rep for almost 10 years now. I was invited in after a couple of incidents, which we don't have to go into here now. And it's important that we move forward. And I've only had one rule since my involvement here in 2 or 3 different committees, was you've got me however you need me, as long as I see movement forward. If we step backwards, you'll lose me. And I'm still here. Everyone that you see here, everyone that I've come across in my other committee meetings are dedicated to moving this forward for our care, our loved ones' care. And let's not forget the staff that have to spend their working days and lives in that facility. We all deserve this. And I hope my little input of, my God, the rooms that we saw, the privacy that would be there is just fantastic. So I hope my little input over the course of this process will say, this would have been great for mom or dad or my brother. And it's time we have it now. So hopefully, Allison, that kind of gave you the twist of why I'm here.
Absolutely. And really appreciate you being here and the work that you've done on the other committees. And this is a big step forward. I mean, it doesn't get bigger than this, I think, and so important that we have your perspective at the table. Teresa, I think that Tom and Nate just said this very well, but I will ask you before we move on, why is it important that we have the patient and the family perspective in all of this?
Thanks, Allison. Yes, it's very important that we do have your input. We, as a clinical team, we know what nurses and physicians and the team need, but it's very important to see it from both sides. And everyone can bring something to this group to help us to make sure that we build these rooms that will meet all the needs and the individualization of all of our patients, families, and community members. So it's very important. I think Tom and Nate said it well, that everyone has a different need. And so there's lots of things that we can learn from you. And that's why we want you to be involved and to share your ideas with us.
And on that note, we said last night, we wish that everybody could be involved here because everybody does have a unique perspective or their own story from an experience in the hospital that could help the user groups to know that. So we do thank everyone who's here tonight, and we do encourage you to share your thoughts with us. So in addition to tonight's town hall, we do want you to visit our engagement website at togetherwebuild.wrh.on.ca. Provide your input there on what you would like to see for the future inpatient units, as well as the 10 other areas of planning that we're talking about. And once we're done, we will share this with the user groups. It really is important, and we really do encourage you to share. So right now, we are going to go to some questions. So please type in any that you have. I don't want you to miss this opportunity. But again, if you do, you can visit our engagement platform. And I'm going to start with a question here from Rob. Rob wants to know, and this question I think is for Lucy. How has benchmarking and best practice process design been incorporated into the room designs or will be?
Number one, they will be 100%. I kind of stalled there because when someone says benchmarking, my brain goes into about 50 different places. Is it benchmarking around the room size? Absolutely, we're using CSA standards. Is it benchmarking around the number of airborne isolation rooms? 100%. We're constantly asking our clients, and we did this as part of our COVID research. So we're involved in either stage 2 or stage 3 of about 6 new or expanded hospitals. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't missing anything. So we asked the most recently developed hospitals like Humber, Oakville, Joseph Brand, CHUM in Montreal, Etobicoke General, and we asked, what was missing? What should we have programmed larger or more of? So we got feedback from the clients, and we've adjusted our programming accordingly. And I can talk about that for 2 hours, but I won't. Then there's all sorts of benchmarking that's done related to interior design and views and angles and equipment and how the washroom is laid out and what you have at the head wall. So there's constant learning, and that is, that our firm has been in business for 72 years. So we're constantly doing research and improving what we program. And of course, we're learning a lot from Windsor Regional Hospital. What is the experience in Windsor? What are the unique requirements that we have to be sensitive about? So, for example, that room where families could take a break, have a shower, we actually haven't programmed that in med-surg units. We have in critical care units, but because we started talking about it, and the group said, that would be great to have that. So we're putting it in. And so there's just constant change in how we develop our functional programs.
Thanks,
Hopefully
Lucy.
I answered your question. Happy to get into more detail if you like.
Yeah, and if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to post them here. This is a quiet group tonight. Normally at this time, our inbox of questions is full, and I think that could be because of the great presentations that we had off the top. We've answered all of the questions, but that's also a warning to everyone out there. If you have questions, get them in. I want to go to a question now that I see that Paul answered this one in writing, but I think it's an interesting question about, this one's from David, who says that Huron Lodge built a temporary to scale mock-up room for a trial / comment before building their new building out on Cabana. And will Windsor Regional consider a similar public process with a mock-up display before the final design? Paul, would you like to?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Thank you, David, for that question. And while it is quite early in the planning process, as Lucy pointed out when she showed those really wonderful pictures of rooms and the details that we'll be eventually, discussing within the user groups and really designing, all of our rooms, patient rooms, treatment rooms, exam rooms, every room in the hospital. We'll be doing that more in stage 3, and the developer will even be refining that further in stage 4. But it's been my experience on projects that I've been a part of, both in Montreal and in Vancouver, that we did develop mock-up rooms. In Montreal, we developed several mock-up rooms, not just the patient room, but also a typical OR room, a typical exam room, and a couple of other rooms. And we actually equipped them with the equipment that we would find in the room, the furniture in the room. And the purpose of that was to really bring staff through those rooms and to, I would say, kick the tires and really check the spaces when they need to, move any equipment around and so on. So it was tremendously useful and really confirmed, the detailed planning that we were working on with the architects and with all of the user groups. And I would add to that to say that technology has enabled us to do even more than that now. And architects are, of course, working with a 3D visualization, right, of rooms, and so that you can put a headset on and you can actually walk into a fully furnished colors, windows, all of it, into a typical patient room or an OR or any other room within the hospital. So we'll be working closely with the architects to develop that kind of virtual mock-ups as well for the new facility.
Thanks, Paul. And that was interesting when we first started talking about this project and we were talking about it, I did have the opportunity to visit a couple of other hospitals where they were doing it, and one had rented an ice rink, and every day, or not every day, every couple of weeks over the course of the summer, they put a different unit on there and allowed people to come in and kick the tires. And I remember the woman said, you know, one of the things that they noticed when kids came into the pediatrics unit was that the desk was too high. So they physically cut the cardboard down, and it was just, it's interesting how different areas do this. And I look forward to however we do that here, that opportunity. I don't see any other questions related to inpatient units here, but just a comment from an attendee who says that rooms for family to shower during medical surgical is welcome. When my dad was passing, my mom didn't want to leave, and she did use the shower across from my dad's room during the night to feel refreshed. So thank you for bringing that into this conversation, and thank you for adding that.
Allison, could I just add something?
Yes.
I was just looking over the list of attendees, and from what was previously mentioned in the conversation, I was hoping that there were no orthopedic surgeons in the group because they now seem to find that they're in possession of 48 inpatient beds. I'm sure Kelly and Christy
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I've started to sweat looking at the list, hoping that no one picked up on that. But I just want to reassure everyone, distribution of services have not been decided upon. Where they're going to go, how they're going to be distributed will be a later part of planning.
I'm sorry, I should have said, for example, at the Credit Valley Hospital, where the orthopedic surgeons needed 48 beds, they were able to move into the adjacent unit.
I wouldn't even give them that idea.
Lucy was checking to see if everyone was paying attention, and Dr. Petrakis, you were.
I pay particular attention to bed distribution and services.
A lot of interesting conversations taking place and a lot still to come. And I do appreciate everyone's time tonight. I do want to check in with our panelists before we go. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you maybe want to talk about? Maybe just raise your hand because I'm actually watching right now. Does anybody have anything to add to this conversation?
Allison, if I might, there's a question that just popped up, and Lucy may have touched on it partially in her presentation and could probably add to it. But the question is, how do we factor population growth and demand for inpatient services 10 years, 20 years, or even beyond that from opening day? What's our strategy, related to that? And perhaps you want to touch on that, Lucy, in terms of our outlook for 10 years, which is really almost opening day, but we're going beyond that with another 10 years of forecasting and out to 20 years. So if you want to maybe touch on that and what our strategy is for shelling in some space and being able to grow into that space in the future.
So we do the projections for the 2-year time period. Why is it, you might ask, why aren't we doing 2030 if that's the day of opening? It's because the ministry, the base year is 2018-19. Obviously, we're not including the 2 COVID years as the foundation for the projections because there was so much that that was not similar to what it would be in the future. And actually the volumes have been less, and we want to base the projections on the higher volumes. So we're doing 2 space lists, one for 28-29, one for 38-39. Even 15 years ago, the ministry would never have allowed us to do that. They would have just done it for the day of opening. And in fact, anything that was related to the Health Services Restructuring Commission in the late 90s, the projections were just till 2003-4. So, so they didn't think about the future at all. But they have started, and we have great success in getting them to agree that they can't build just for the day of opening. because we've got that second time frame, the architects will have to show how that space will be built. And there's all sorts of different strategies. One is to actually build it and shell it. One is just so build it, but not shell it. And what Milton did was they actually did everything but equip it. And so they were able to just, once they got approval to operate the additional beds, they just put the furniture in and they were ready to go. In the case of Oakville, and now Oakville needs the additional bed capacity. They need to operate those beds because of the population growth. There is a shortened timeframe for approval with the government, and the proponents, the contractors, have put everything in place to allow the construction or the fitting out to be done very efficiently. And then what we also do is we identify what might be required for the subsequent 5 years, and the population projections are only available, I think, till like 43, 44, if I'm not mistaken. We actually look at that as well and say, did we build in enough capacity to accommodate that? Because when we do our room projections, we round up, and so we will add that space as well, or at least identify that it will be required. And also, just in terms of rounding up, if between the two time periods you need 2.8 additional inpatient units, obviously we're rounding that up to 3. Even if you needed 1.3 additional, we would be rounding it up to 2. So that's the other way that we build in capacity. So you'd actually have to build that in that first time frame.
Lucy, I would add to that because I too remember the 20 years ago and projecting to the future and what the ministry would allow us to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned in one of the town halls a few nights ago that things have really changed for the ministry, and we've really all, including the ministry, learned a lot about COVID and in a pandemic, and we've learned how little capacity that we had to flex, to grow quickly. And obviously we had to have pop-up facilities and parking lots and things of that nature, and we don't want to see that ever again. So it is really it's really more than comforting, really. It's so reassuring that we'll be able to build in some extra capacity, even if it's shelled space, that will be able to fit that out quickly and be able to respond should another crisis like that emerge. So it's great to see that things are evolving and that the ministry is supporting these kinds of strategies, because if it isn't that, it will be our population that maybe grows faster than any of us really anticipated and tried so hard to project, and we'll have to grow sooner than we may think, and at least we'll have the space to be able to do that in.
And another change that has occurred is that they're now allowing us to build into the bed projections those patient days that occur in the emergency department. So you all know about patients who are in the emerge, who are waiting to get a bed. So that translates to what's called a patient day. And that's the basis for, we've incorporated that in the projections for the med-surg beds. So more beds upstairs, patients downstairs not having to wait to get upstairs.
Thanks, Lucy and Paul, and thanks, Paul, for the question there. Thanks, Paul, for catching it as well. And with that, I will ask our panelist again, does anybody have anything else to add to tonight's conversation? And Paul's hand is raised.
Well, as Lucy was showing those wonderful images of patient rooms and pointing out some of the features, and I'm watching the our Q&A and comments that are coming through. I just wanted to point out a few other things. I wanted to point out the windows in that Oakville room that I think Nate touched on as well, and shared with us how important that connection, with the window and that connection to nature, is in the recovery, the healing process of a patient that's in that bed. And I've been fortunate enough to have led a few projects in my career. And I used to say at the outset with the planning team and with the user groups, if we don't get any other room right or even perfect, we want the patient room to be perfect. We want it to be the absolute best that it can possibly be. And we need to have, a really acute attention to detail. And that window next to the couch goes right down to the floor. And the reason for that is obviously from the bed, from the patient's view, you can see right down to the ground, from that sitting up in the bed. And that's important to see what's going on out there and to have that connection with nature, more than just being able to see the treetops and the clouds and, what kind of a day it is, it is out. Another thing that, stands out, and we were asked this question before, will there be ceiling lifts, in the patient rooms? Because we know what it's like for nursing staff and others to have to move these mobile lifts around and get other people to come to the room, to lift a patient out of bed. And of course, we know, Lucy, in these single rooms that ceiling lifts are part of the room. Not only are they just part of the room to lift the patient out of the bed, but they actually lead right into the washroom. Mm-hmm. And that is a big, I think, improvement in patient rooms. Nate also touched on mobility, space to get up, to walk around. He also mentioned fresh air, if I heard him correctly. And I wanted to touch on that a bit, because in two of the projects that I've been a part of, the one in Montreal and in Vancouver, when we were designing the building and we were looking at, what is likely to be, an inpatient tower, probably arranged with, 2 units, the way that you laid them out, there are different configurations of what that might look like. And the user teams will look at those configurations and look at the placement of the nursing stations and really in detail look at the staff flow and the number of steps, and really looking at, like Teresa pointed out earlier, efficiencies, on the inpatient unit. But those inpatient towers usually sit on the top of the diagnostic and treatment block, that is in our language, the 3 or 4 stories in which, you have the main lobby and you have the emergency department on the ground floor, and next to it, the diagnostic imaging and, potentially the cafeteria and some other services on that ground. And then you have your ORs and, you're moving up. And in a couple of the projects, we actually put an outdoor rooftop courtyard. And I think they have this also at Oakville, where patients from the inpatient units could come down and actually move out into a rooftop courtyard where, their family member could take them there. They could get some fresh air, have some respite out there, some gulps of course, fresh air. And even physio could take them down to that rooftop courtyard and do a little activation with them. And that's a concept that I think is it's not brand new. It's not rocket science. It's just good, I think, design. And I think that as we move forward, into the design process, that may be something that we look at. In addition, I think that the rooftops are likely going to be green roofs, which I think are more pleasant to look at if you have to look at a roof than the typical gravel shingle type roofs that would otherwise be. And lastly, I would just sort of touch on the arrival experience, in the main lobby, and how, it will be open and airy, kind of like obviously like the new hospitals that have recently been built, like Oakville, like Vaughan, and it's a much more welcoming environment. Also to mention, having a welcome desk where someone is there to greet you and to assist you if you need to find your way, to a particular service. But one of the things I also like is that we talk often about intuitive wayfinding. And we spoke earlier about this main street that connects to the lobby and probably connects over to the cancer center. And, it's really a main navigation artery, through a new hospital. But what I particularly like is when you come into one of these lobbies, you can see the public elevators. You know exactly where to go. And if you're in the middle of the building, those elevators can take you straight up to to an inpatient unit. And what we obviously will be planning in the new hospital are not only public lobbies for patients and family, but also back of house logistics elevators for staff and for movement of supplies and food and things of that nature. The days of kind of trying to squeeze into an elevator because there's a stretcher in the elevator, there's another piece of equipment, there's recyclable materials, all kinds of stuff moving in the existing elevators that we currently have. Those days are numbered as we move into an environment where we can really be truly patient and family focused with our design.
So a lot different than what we currently have.
very, very much so. A totally different experience. And I think it's been touched on, by many of the panelists tonight. And I'm really encouraged by some of the questions and comments that we've received, that I think people are aware that these things exist elsewhere, and they're expecting them for Windsor-Essex, and we're all here to deliver that.
Absolutely. And that's why we're doing this, to get as many ideas on the table as possible. Nate, I saw your hand up there. Did you have a last word here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to chime in quickly. Hearing all of that really made me think more about the difference between London Health Sciences and Windsor and how it stood out to me. So when you're an inpatient at Windsor, I was on 7 a lot, the 7th floor. And in order to traverse from your room to fresh air, you're walking down a very tight, sometimes cluttered and busy, narrow hallway past the vulnerability of other patients, of course. The door is wide open. And you get to the elevator, and it's sort of as though it's a hindrance to move through the halls as a patient. You feel like you're getting in the way. And then you get to the elevator, which is of public use, down to the main floor, down, and the only way to go out is the entrance. And it really feels like you're out of place. Whereas at London Health Sciences, very different, you're actually compelled to move. And they have offices like social worker's office, amongst others, of course. Nephrology would, of course, be in there. And it goes around the outside of the units. And then you have the patient rooms sort of in like a hub off to the side. And so you're compelled to leave your room and you take a route, and they actually tell you which route works best. And then they have a courtyard like you were speaking about earlier, which was actually built in 1991, the year I was born. That's why I remember it. And they have gardens and trees and all these things out there, and benches for you to sit. And it's all on the floor, and it's part of, I guess, what would be either the main floor or a roof. So that juxtaposition for me really shows a nice alternative. And I also felt like the general air of the patients and the nurses was far different because of that space that we had, that we all had, staff and patients alike. One last small thing, I remember having a conversation with a staff member out in the courtyard while I was recovering from my transplant. And it's just little things like that that really made you feel more human and less of a patient.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and I think the important thing there is it's not by accident that that happens, right? It's by design. And we are really fortunate to have this opportunity and to have all these great people at the table making sure that this is built into the design. And I think that's a nice note to end it on tonight. I do want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. Once again, please continue to share your ideas. togetherwebuild.wrh.on.ca. This site that I've been talking about will remain live for 1 month after the town hall. So you can continue to share your thoughts, anything that comes to you later tonight, next week, a couple weeks from now. Please share. And then following that, the results will be summarized and they'll be shared with our planning team. So your input will help guide the decision-making throughout the process. Please take the time to share your thoughts. And later this year, we're going to do this all again. So you'll have a chance to see how the planning has progressed, how this input was used in the planning, and where we're at a year from now. I want to thank all of you for being here with us tonight. I hope you'll join our conversation tomorrow. As I mentioned, tomorrow we're talking about the future of education and learning services. Going to be an exciting conversation, especially from the perspective of potential students, future students, anybody who's thinking of a career in medicine and at the hospital. Very special thanks again to our panelists. We are fortunate to have you all part of the planning process and also have you here tonight with us to share what you've been talking about, and good luck with the rest of your planning work. And for the final word of the night, I am going to turn this conversation over one more time to Teresa to close us out.
Thanks, Allison. And really, I just want to thank everyone who has come and joined us tonight for your participation, being here. We really value you joining and putting your input into this. Your questions will help guide us, and that's what we need. We really are excited about this. Windsor has been waiting a very long time. I think I said it once before that I have been in these small cramped hospitals for a very long time working. And we know that we deserve this, and we want to build the very best possible inpatient rooms for our patients. As Paul said, the one thing that we are going to get right are these inpatient rooms for you. And so we thank you for joining us tonight, for your input, your questions. And if you have something, input or any other questions, please, bring them to the website. And we look forward to working with you over the next couple of years. Very exciting times.
Absolutely. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.